Hello, I am Sensei Kevlar. Welcome back to the Dojo. So excited to have you here. We've been looking at ways in which markets are driven by bots and the trends that they follow. We've examined how creating a plan in terms of allocation and distribution allows us to create opportunities for ourselves for buying and selling, and then we can optimize that plan based upon the trends of the market that we analyze to be true. If that is the case, and we're trying to make this the best optimized plan we can, it behooves us to include more information about what the traders are going to be doing. The more information we have, that the traders have, the better our decision making is going to be. So far, we've looked a lot at the trend-based analysis in terms of support and resistance. And we've looked at ways of finding the trends and when they're broken, and how traders are paying attention to that in terms of decision-making points. Okay. And finally, we looked at how, since these trends are happening based upon standard motions of the market, standard deviations of those motions form. Simply because that's what traders are looking at. So today what we're going to do is we're going to try and take some of the work out of this analysis, because it's kind of tedious to sit here and draw these lines. We're going to use another trick that the bot programmers use. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and derive a mathematical formula for how to determine where the trend is in time. So what we're going to do is we're going to use math, and I'm going to bring on another worksheet here. Remember for 1 minute that this is a representation of a series of data. If we were to take the closing values of each and every one of these candles in a series, we would end up with a series of numbers. You know, this is one number, this is a close here, a close here, a close here, a close here. These would all be numbers at the end of the day that we could copy into a worksheet. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and deduce a formula that mathematically figures out what the relative direction of the trend is. The way that we can do that is we can use something called the relative strength index. And what the RSI is, I'm just going to pull out Investopedia here. The relative strength index is a formula that you apply to give a single step in the RSI. And the formula is very simply 100 minus 100 over 1 plus the average gain divided by the average loss. So in what we're going to do today is we're going to break this down, and we're going to actually compute the RSI ourselves. Okay. In order to do so, we're going to start out by taking those close values, the values that from the closing candles. And in this case, I'm literally just going to make them up for the sake of argument. Okay. What we can say is that, you know, if this were a candle chart, this would be the first candle, this would be the second candle, the close, the third candle, fourth candle, fifth candle. And if we were to do something like plot this, you know, you could see that the market is definitely moving up and down. There we go. Get a nice little plot of that. Except I don't want to make that a bar graph. What I want to do, a column chart. What I want to do is make that a line chart. There we go. Okay, so we've got our nice little market, and we've extracted the closes from our market, and we've copied them into a worksheet. And then, according to the formula, bringing up the formula again, the formula had us computing the average gain and the average loss. So in order to figure out the average of anything, first we need to figure out the underlying number. So let's figure out the gain and the loss. And the way to do that is to simply take one number and compare it to the next one. Excuse me. If the number went down, we call that a loss, and we measure how much the loss was. If the number in turn went up, we call that a gain, and we measure how much the gain was. So here, we don't have anything because this is our starting number and we have nothing to compare it to. But the next one was a loss of 1, followed by a gain of 3, followed by a gain of 2, gain of 5, loss of 7, and then here we had a 0, here we had a loss of 2, loss of 6, loss of 2. You can see this is very simply just a formula to compute, if A5 is greater than A6, then we do, or sorry, if A6 is greater than A5, then we do A6 minus A5, else we do 0. Okay? On the other side, it's the other way around. If A5 is greater than A6, then we do A5 minus A6, else it's 0. What this does is this gives us our gain and our loss. Then the next part of the formula is that we want to compute the average over a time period. Okay, so what we can do is we can say, coming back to, sorry, let me just get that sheet in the right browser here. Okay, what we want to do is we want to get, so for this field right here, what we want to do is we want to look back 5 candles, and we want to compute the average gain. We want to take all of these numbers and divide them by 5, which is exactly what we're doing. The average of B2 to B6, right? B2 to B6, or B2 to B6 rather. We're computing the average gain over the past 5, right? Same thing here, we're going to compute the average gain over the past 5. Same thing here, we're going to compute the average gain over the past 5. So what you can see here is what's happening is there's like a sliding window that's moving down. So every number that we're computing is a sliding window that looks back 5 and computes the average of what it is we're seeing, okay? Then we're just going to do exactly the same thing for the average loss. That's this here, okay? We're just taking, 5 back, averaging it out, 5 back, averaging it out, okay? Again, C3 to C7, C4 to C8, etc., etc. Then what we want to do, according to the formula, is we want to divide the average gain by the average loss. Now, what we're doing here is we have figured out, was there more gain than loss? And if so, what's going to happen is that the gain's going to come out on top of that equation when we do our division. Versus if the loss came out, we're going to end up with a much, much, much smaller number. Okay? So if this is a small number and this is a big number, if we had more gain than loss in the past 5 periods on average, we're going to end up with a much bigger amplified number because we're dividing, 2 by 0.2 and we're ending up with 10. Okay? On the flip side, if we have a bigger loss than we do gain in the past 5 averages, we're going to end up with a smaller number. Okay? So we end up with this series, and again, this is just dividing these two together. Simple formula. Really easy formula. Okay? The final part of the RSI is to take the result of the average gain and the average loss, add 1 to it, take that, divide it by 100, take that, and take 100 and subtract it from 100. Now, what we're doing here is we're creating a range between 0 and 100, which is basically a way of saying that we're creating an oscillator. When the numbers tend to go up, the result of this equation, this oscillation, will tend towards 100. When the numbers go down, they will tend towards 0. Okay. So what we end up is with, when we have no data, we end up with 50s. But here's our formula. We say the average gain divided by the average loss plus 1 take that, divide 100, take that, and 100 minus it. Okay? What this does is this gives us our oscillator. Here we are, going up to 90, 55, 58. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot this. Here's the RSI right here. We're going to plot this. We need to make this a line chart. Okay. What we can see is that when the chart was in an upward trend, the RSI was moving up towards 100. When the chart was in a downward trend, the RSI was moving towards 0. This should be expected, because the more gain over loss we have, the higher the RSI is going to go. The more loss over gain we have, the lower the RSI is going to go, oscillating between 0 and 100 with sideways motion, an average gain and an average loss that equals 0, that divvies out to nothing, literally being 50, being sideways motion. Now, the whole point of this is that this graph right here is mathematically computing a trend relative of the gain to the loss. We're showing the ratio of gain to loss as an oscillator between 0 and 100. Now, obviously, when I actually go to do this with a chart, I'm not going to get out Excel and start copying in numbers here. This is quite ridiculous. The point is to break down the math and show you exactly what's happening and exactly what it is you're seeing. You're seeing the difference of gains to loss over a moving window, looking backwards for a given point in time, and you're seeing it oscillate between 0 and 100. So, why is this relevant? Because traders are doing this. Traders are programming their bots this way, and what they're doing is they're coming in here and they're saying, and I'm going to move slow here for 1 minute, I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to click on Indicators, up here at the top, and I'm going to type in RSI, Relative Strength Index, and I'm going to add that to my chart. Now, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this equation that I just did. I'm using a look-back period of 14 candles, so on every candle I'm computing the average gain and loss 14 candles back, and I'm using the close from the candles, okay? Again, I just went to Indicators, typed in RSI, clicked on Relative Strength Index, and added that to my chart. Now, what's happening here, I'm just going to go out to the 1 day here. What's happening here is that this is showing us trends that traders are trading against. More to the point, what it's showing us is that when traders see an RSI below 30 or an RSI below 20, they react. Okay? Here's a case where the RSI was below 20 and the market went up, and then traders reacted and the market went up again, right? Here's a case where the RSI was below 20 and look at the spike that followed. More cases of RSI below 20, okay? And then when we get sideways action, well, the RSI goes sideways, right? No matter where in the chart we are, the RSI will always tend towards 50 when we have sideways action. Okay? So what we're doing here is we're looking at what the traders are looking at, and we're saying, oh, look, when the RSI hits 30, well, those are heavily correlated points. Those are points that are very heavily correlated by traders, and what they do is they go, oh, okay, so one of the things that I'm going to program my bot for, because I'm a scientist and all that I have is, numbers that I can program in a programming language, one of the things I'm going to program my bots for is when the RSI dips below 30, that's when I'm going to be doing my buying. And you see this trend over and over again. Let me go to ZEC USD, right? Look at what happens every single time the RSI dips below 30. right? These are literally the turnaround points. You know, in all cases where the market came up and turned around, this is where the market came up and turned around. The reason for that is because this is what the other traders are looking at. Okay, so what we've done is we've now done a form of automated analysis of the trend. Rather than us coming in here and going, well, is the trend going this way? Is the trend going this way? We can very clearly see what the average trend looking back for any given period is. And what we can do is we can optimize our plan further this way. But, you know, before we had, was it on support? 1. Was that support heavily correlated with other resistance and support? 2. Was that support correlated with a projection or a standard deviation of a prior motion? 3. Was that support, or was a trend recently broken? 4. Okay, now we have a 5th one. Is the RSI below 30 or 25 or 20? I don't know what the magic number is, but in back testing we can find out. By going back and looking and seeing what the correlation is, we can actually come in here and say, actually, RSI, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like you to, you know, signal at 25 and 75. And what I've done is I've just expanded my bars so that it touches right here. And I can see, you know, the places, you know, and that maybe kept me out of this opportunity right here. So what I'm gonna come in here now is I'm gonna say, well, what about 35? Or I'm gonna back test my strategy. Okay, what if I had bought every time the RSI was below 35? Well, if I had bought there and dollar cost average there, could I have made money? Would have kept me out of this one, right? Would have kept me out of this opportunity right here, right? But would it have gotten me in here? Yeah, look at the RSI. Okay, what about here? Would it have, you know, what about over here? Right there. Was that a good place to be buying because you could have sold right there? Of course it was. What about right here? Definitely below it. Was it a good place to be buying and then get out right here so you could get back in right here? What if you missed your opportunity here? Did you have a planned dollar cost average down here? No matter what you do, you can optimize your plan by including more information, right? If you see a support and resistance line, but the RSI is, you know, up here, well, maybe it's got more room to run. And we're not going to buy that support line, right? If you see a correlation, but the correlation is 3 out of 7, right? If we assign each of these a point, and we're looking for 7 points, and we only have got 3 of them, do you buy at that point? My answer would be to test. My answer would be to say, is 3 of 7 enough to make us money in this market, or does 5 of 7 work better? Okay, so if that's the case, if we're including more and more information, then we need to know what the rest of the traders are doing, right? One of the other things that they're doing is not only are they looking for price points down here below a certain price point, but they're also looking for trend reversals. And we can use a similar technique. Here we were just doing a basic average. We were saying 5 back and then average that, okay? If we were to do something like use a weighted moving average, which is to say that as the numbers got further back in time, they became less important, they decayed in the series. What we could do is we could take 2 of those weighted moving averages and make a long one and a short one, a fast one and a slow one that looked back 14 periods and one that looked back 28 periods. And what we could do then is we would be measuring the relative strength, the average gain to loss over two different time frames. We would be saying that there's a fast one, which measures a short amount of time, and there's a slow one, which measures a longer amount of time. And then we could compare them. We could compare them by saying, well, if the fast one is catching up to the slow one, if the slow one is, coming into line with the fast one, then what that means is that the trends have started to converge. The long-term trend versus the short-term trend. Okay? However, if we see divergence, if we see the short-term trend taking off without the long-term trend, we know that we're seeing a trend change. Okay? So what we can do is we can use the same technique here, and we're doing exactly the same thing. And I'm not going to go through the whole tedious math of making a weighted moving average. Just take my word for it. Look up weighted moving average, right? What we're going to do is we're going to take the moving average convergence divergence, MACD. Call it the MACD, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to have two weighted moving averages of the average gain over the average loss on an oscillator from 0 to 100, just like the RSI, except we're going to use two different time periods. We're going to have one that looks back 12 periods for our fast acting one. It doesn't incorporate data in the past. And we're going to have a slow moving one, where data is, data from the past is much more incorporated. The blue line is our 12, and the orange line is our 26. Okay, so the blue line is our fast line, and the orange line is our slow line. And what you'll see, I'm just going to kill the RSI for 1 minute here. What you'll see is that because it's a weighted moving average, it's a lot smoother than the RSI. Okay. But what happens is when you have a major motion in the market, the blue line reacts first. Okay? And the blue line comes down here. And then what happens is eventually the longer one, with more information from the past weighting it down, slowing it down, catches up and follows. So what you're seeing here is from this point, you're seeing divergence. You're seeing the fast trend take off without the slow trend, right? Right here, where this thing went down and down and down and down, okay? And it went up and it went up, but it mostly went down. And it didn't really have a turnaround until the fast trend, which had been diverging, see how it had been separating from the slow trend? It didn't really turn around until the fast trend caught up with the slow trend and they converged. So what happened at the point of conversion? Well, the market turned around again. Okay, so before, if we were using the RSI, maybe the RSI would have had us buying here, had us buying here, had us buying here, but what does the MACD tell us? The MACD tells us that the fast trend is still in motion and the slow trend hasn't caught up yet. Then we get a convergence. We get the slow trend to turn around, the fast trend to turn around, then the slow trend to turn around, and then they converge. And what happens to the market? Why? Because this is what traders are trading on. This is what traders are programming their bots with. They don't have our eyes. They have numbers. They have these formulas. So they're sitting here and saying, okay, 1, support and resistance, 2, trend broken, 3, projection, 4, retracement, 5, RSI, 6, MACD convergence. Now what we have is we have a signal that would have kept us out here, kept us out here, kept us out here, but had us going, kept us out here, but had us going heavy here. So prior to now, we had a good plan, because it had us dollar cost averaging when it goes like this and like this and like this. Now we have a better plan, because it doesn't have us dollar cost averaging when it hits here, here, and here. It has us waiting to do our dollar cost averaging down here when the buying is better, when the opportunity is greater. What we've done is, by incorporating more information into our plan, we have further optimized our plan. All that remains at this point is to plan the trade and trade the plan. And what that looks like is going through and figuring out when this tells you now is the time. Was now the time? I'd say yes. Was now the time? I'd say yes. Right? Was now the time? Look at what happens. Was now the time to be buying on this day? This is on a day chart. Right? When the thing turned around right here, when things started to converge, when you started to get convergence on this, time to do a little dollar cost averaging and get out up here. Plan the trade, trade the plan. Your homework is to go and apply these indicators to more charts. Go and look at the markets. Go figure out what it is you like. Go see what time frames, 3 hour, 4 hour, 6 hour. Go see what rule set provided you with the most profit. Do it all on paper. Come back on Monday, because on Monday, we're going to change it up again. On Monday, we're going to start looking into how to do all this stuff with our eyes closed, or how to make the computer do it all for us. Actually automating everything that I just said. I really hope you join me then, and I look forward to seeing you. Good night.